You are listening to I Am Interchange.
I am interchange.
I am interchange.
I am Interchange.
Fostering curiosity, education, and empathy by exploring the controversial and the provocative.
I am interchange.
Hey, this is Tate Chamberlain with I Am Interchange. Joining me today is Timothy Tate, an archetypal psychotherapist based out of Montana. Building from our previous podcast, Timothy takes us on a journey of understanding how we can both leverage and abuse machismo. Using the blending of a matriarchy and patriarchy as a model, Timothy believes that the tension of opposites drive both creativity and destruction. Can we use this archetype to better understand the human experience and unshackle machismo as being a mere gender stereotype? This episode is a precursor to a larger panel we have coming up in February. 7 people from different backgrounds will be discussing machismo, what it means to them, and how it can be a both negative and positive tool. Hope to see you there. How's it going today?
It's going well. It's a pre-winter day. It's overcast. It's kind of mild. Been in my archetypal psychotherapist office.
Yeah, tell me, what is that? How would you define it, and how do you interpret what you do?
Yeah. Well, there's many traditions that psychotherapy or mental health or counseling or psychology or psychiatry pull from. And those are all different kind of divisions within that broader field of mental health. But archetypal psychotherapy has a history that goes back to Freud. And Freud developed in the late 19th century this idea of depth psychology. And then he mentored and was a group of Austrians and Swiss German thinkers at the time. One of them was Carl Jung. And Carl Jung picked up where Freud kind of stopped, at least in his mind. And that was that Freud was thinking that all could be analyzed around childhood trauma and sexual tension and libido issues.
Huh.
So then the mantle was passed to Carl Jung, who said there's more to the human experience than sexual tension.
Okay.
You might have to look for it, but it's there. And developed the idea of the collective unconscious, of the idea of self, of a self-governing mechanism within the psyche, rather than just ego. And introduced the idea of archetypes, not unknown to the Greeks. Plato coined the term back in the day. His successor was James Hillman. James Hillman founded the discipline of archetypal psychology. He was my mentor.
Okay. Personally, you had a personal relationship?
Right.
Where was that at?
In Montana, in New York, in California. We had a 12-year mentorship before he passed in 16.
And so you're kind of carrying on that torch.
Right. I actually am putting into practice in the consulting room his intellectual idea of what archetypal psychology is. So I was the first one to put into practice archetypal theory in the consulting room back in the day. So all that means is that neurotic suffering, if not mental illness generally speaking, is a consequence of too small a perspective. We get governed by our persona, how we've been conditioned and trained, which yields into what we're talking about when we think about macho as a gender identity for men, how we're socialized and trained. And we use that perspective to manage a much bigger story than that. And so we have too small tools to encounter the mystery of the human experience. There are patterns in the human experience that are important to understand so you don't personalize your life. That's where suffering happens. Those patterns are archetypes. So in my practice, people have to be dreaming, they have to be reading, they have to be creating, they have to be writing, they have to access something more than their personal story.
Do you work at all with shadow work?
That's what I do.
Yeah, okay. I'm doing this facilitation training around groups and conflict, and one of my favorite pieces to it is kind of working around the shadow of my own intentions and kind of figuring out what that is, and how other people wear that So
That's right.
interesting.
Yeah, the dark side, the shadow. Again, Jung introduced that idea of shadow.
Yeah.
Hillman takes it into the underworld, uses the underworld as the metaphor for the shadow, draws a lot from the Greek mythology for understanding ourselves, because the Greeks had the gods and goddesses and myths and stories, and now we have distilled all that and named it into pathologies. Bipolarity, that used to be Zeus, and his shadow brother is Hades, the underworld. That opens up a whole different story than what meds should you be on.
Yeah, it does. Well, so what's macho mean to you?
Yeah, it's kind of a almost anachronistic term for me, but it still has a lot of power because of what it represents. So macho means to me the leveraging of the masculine for personal gain. So masculine has a great deal of power, whether it be expressed in testosterone and physical strength, or whether it be expressed in the cultural predisposition of what masculinity means and the power that comes with the patriarchy as an example of that cultural predisposition.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a leveraging of a predisposition and physical prowess and hormones for personal gain.
Is being macho bad? Is it? I mean, is there a negative to it? What is there? Is it always bad? Is being macho always just a horrible thing?
Yeah, of course not. The form that machoism takes comes from a cultural canon, Spanish, Mexican roots. That's the word, if I'm correct. Machismo. Conquistadors, machismo. So there's, in my head, a negative predisposition to that term, but on the same side, there is a stature to a strong man, if that's a synonym to what we mean by macho, that I deeply respect. What makes it interesting to me is what the motivation is and how that force of the masculine is applied. Typically, my understanding of macho is that it's applied for personal leverage. There's another way that that force can be applied, and that is for the good of the community.
So, like taking a leadership role in like defending a tribe or defending your people.
Cesar Chavez would have been a macho cat in my book.
Do you have any macho characteristics to yourself?
Yeah.
Like what?
Dude, can't you see?
Well, I don't know. I want you to tell them to me. What are a couple of macho characteristics?
A certain kind of ability to manage your fear. So it might look like fearlessness, but it might not be. But you have ridden that tiger and overcome your fear. It has to do with leadership. It has to do with the capacity to stand one's ground in spite of conflict.
Do you have to be macho to be a good leader?
You don't have to be macho to be a good leader. Matter of fact, we have an example of what might be considered a macho leader right now is the President of the United States, and that is not what I consider leadership. So it certainly has its shadow side. Again, remembering that macho, in my definition, is leveraging the masculine for personal gain.
But you also said it wasn't always a bad thing.
Right.
So is that...
So the tension there, or the paradox of that, Tate, is that the motivation can often begin with some sort of read on the masculine function of a strategic sense of what I can profit from, what I can gain from, what I can affect. I'm always scanning for that. Some men then turn that, what can I profit from? How can I profit from this exchange?
So kind of like intention.
Certainly.
It can be
strategic, intentional. Yep.
Yeah, so macho can be a positive thing as long as your intention kind of checks out.
Well, that's where it gets a little fuzzy, because macho, by definition in my dictionary, is unconscious. Can't help himself. It's compulsive. So there's no intention with unconscious roles.
What about like sexuality? How does macho limit how we discover our own sexuality and like our ability to experiment and try new things? Does that create a door?
Well, if we're the subset of macho having to do with testosterone and power, then of course the sexual tension between individuals, whatever their sexual preference is, has to do with a power differential. And machoism is seen as the crown of masculine force and energy and dominance. And that can be a turn on, that can be abusive.
Do you think like an ultra feminist and a ultra macho person have anything in common?
Zealousness would be probably something they would share in common. I think that's where we're in trouble right now in our society, whether it be about religious zealots or political zealots. When you give over the bandwidth of the human experience to one particular signal, you're over-identified with a particular subject or principle or cause, which often is what it takes for something to move ahead.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, that alienates and polarizes. And so ultimately, any zealous person on either side of the scale is actually the same.
So maybe a feminist could hinder their own sexual experience because they don't want to be slut shamed or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But kind of, I don't know, I'm trying to piece together that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a stretch. I think the sexual energy is its own subject. It might be a part of what you're wanting to convey about the power of, or this thing called macho. But as we talk about it, I have to go back to that sexual power differential and sexual erotic fantasy requirement that individuals have in their unconscious that determines what turns them on or not. And certainly the classic image of the macho man, I'm thinking hair on the chest and the unbuttoned shirt.
Basically you.
That it can create a kind of tension that is exciting. And its shadow is dominance. And if there's some consensual agreement behind that, bravo.
Like a dominant, submissive type thing.
Of consenting adults, right.
So in your relationship at home, which one of you makes the sandwich?
We're gluten-free, so sandwiches aren't big.
All right. Who cooks? Like, is there a social norm around cooking?
That's good. A skill set more than a social norm. Susan is the master of the kitchen and protects that domain fiercely.
Is that just because of the times? Like,
gifts, the times.
Yeah.
We have, for as radical as we are in many different ways, whether it be psychology, philosophy, politics, or cosmic beliefs, has some traditional values. I bring home the bacon and she cooks it, and we're good with that. It just falls in keeping with who we are. But at the same time, that does not mean there's some sort of duty or obligation with those roles.
When was the last time you cooked a meal for her?
For Susan, the other night,
Yeah, okay. All right.
steaks, by the way, grilled steaks.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how, like, what pieces of the meal a man versus woman might cook.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you cook a good steak?
I've been known to cook we like medium rare.
Yeah, me too.
So 450 degrees for 4.5 minutes on the side gets you there.
Nice.
Just saying.
So what, would you rather live in a matriarch or a patriarch society?
I've not had any experience with a matriarchal society.
What would
so
it be
I'm only
like to you?
guessing. Yeah. Well, I'm in the middle of writing a trilogy on this subject. The first book has been published, and it's The Demise of the Patriarchy and the Dawning of the Matriarchy in Current Times. So I'm very concerned about that. And the third volume of that trilogy will be then the marriage between the two, which is the highest.
So like Bill and Hillary Clinton?
No. Although, that's funny. I think we can do better than that. But yes.
How do they fit together?
Maybe Michelle and Barack, but
Oh, okay.
yeah, that would be a lot closer. How do they fit together?
Yeah, like what would complement it, the
Yeah.
situation?
Well, back to my practice in terms of a model, the tension of opposites is what drives human creativity and destruction. So it's the balancing act that we all as humans and cultures and families must walk. It's not going to disappear. If that opposite tension is war and peace, if it's Republican or Democrat, if it's male and female, there's always a tension of opposites.
Mm-hmm.
That's the human experience. Jung called it maturity, the capacity to bear the tension of irreconcilable paradox. That's the challenge. So the union of opposites, of blending the masculine and feminine, is not for the faint of heart. It's the pinnacle in my mind of the human conscious experience. It can't be done by trickery, by intelligence, or by performing some role. So in other words, what would that look like? Well, Susan and I are in our 40th year of working at it, and we're getting close in the sense that there's a deep respect for the qualities of the masculine and feminine without a need or compulsion to drive it a certain direction.
Do you think religion will ever let us get there?
I don't know how you can get there with a male god.
Well, so how many gods are male?
In the dominant religions?
Yeah,
100%.
all of them. Yeah, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, when Christians cross over and meet a black woman as their creator, that's going to be quite the moment. Who knows? But as long as there's a monotheism with a male god, I'm not sure how there's going to be equity.
We were talking about this a little earlier about, as times get more dire and resources run out, say like water, for example, runs out, or in a third world country where resources are lacking, where do human rights fit into that? I mean, does that come secondary? Like, does the topic of macho become secondary to much larger issues that might be at play?
Its role would certainly change. The point here for me about the leveraging masculine for personal gain as macho, there's a counterpoint to that those of us who have been working in men's studies since the mid-'80s, since Robert Bly and others coined the term and started really bringing this to consciousness, the other side of macho is the wild man. And the difference between the two is that there is this wild force in the masculine psyche that either is leveraged for personal gain or is brought to the community in service of leadership, social issues, equality, all the things you were talking about. The wild man is an energy within the masculine that has to be liberated from the conditioning of culture, whether it be over-conditioning by the mother to be a good little boy, or whether it be the shadow of the macho, which says whatever I can dominate is mine. There has to be a way of harnessing or putting into play that wild man energy in service to community. If we don't get there sooner than later, our system will collapse.
Didn't they say that in the 60s?
Say what?
Just talking about the system collapsing and
Sure.
just like 1968 would probably be an okay comparison.
I was there.
Yeah.
Right? I was
Yeah.
on the street.
Do you see a lot of parallels between 1968 and today? Is today worse, better? I mean, 53,000 people haven't died yet
Right.
in a war, but
How many have been mauled and maimed over the last 15 years of war?
yeah, a lot
that
more than that
number?
probably a couple 100,000.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're just not American.
No. I mean, we've been at war now for 16 years. The toll that it's taken is different than the toll that Vietnam took. Ken Burns. The difference between 1968 and 2018 that we're about to enter is that the darkness has gotten much more clever, refined, and pernicious. In other words, Nixon was an asshole. He was a fool, and he was a bully. But he wasn't the disturbed kind of energy that is now in control.
With a bunch of lawyers attached.
Right. Well, he had his fleet of lawyers, but there was a naivete and an innocence in his assholeness. That's gone. It's been refined. And back in the day, there was actually a prayer and hope and an image of some sort of social democracy that was tangible.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's a joke.
Is there one comparison you could draw that you have in common with Donald Trump? Your shadow self.
For sure. I mean, I'm the same height. I'm a lot leaner than that guy. No, I have great respect for his cleverness and his cunning and his capacity to know the collective unconscious of our society so well he doesn't even have to think about it to manipulate it. You know, the guy's a freaking genius.
Yeah.
He's a complete demon, an asshole, but he knows what he's doing.
Is he macho?
Yeah. So that raises an interesting question, the difference between a narcissist and macho. And there's not much.
What is it?
I'd have to stretch.
I'm begging with anticipation.
Yeah, you are. Well, there's a clinical checklist for what makes a narcissist man, and there's not a clinical checklist for a macho man, but they would share 5 or 6 of the same qualifiers. So what that looks like is, without going into it in too much depth, a lack of conscience. Just start there.
And you're not going to go down the rest of them? A lack of conscience is I would say that describes macho, maybe.
It's part of it.
Yeah. What about nature, though? I mean, isn't nature like be macho or die? Like animals kill, other males kill other males in order to mate.
Sure. Is that a part of the evolutionary story that needs to atrophy? Or is that something that's a given and universal for as long as the human species can survive? Because what's the whole idea of domination, being able to dominate an animal, a woman, a planet, another man, is what we're talking about here. And that's as dark as it gets.
Mm-hmm.
Trump has been able to dominate the political scene because of the attributes I just described, because everybody else was playing, well, with the exception of the Republican Party inner circle, been playing with another handbook, another agreement, another set of rules. And unfortunately, that comes across as weak in the public eye. Democrats don't have a leader, they don't know what they're doing, they're floundering. When in fact, that whole social engagement and consensus building and cooperation is as strong as dominance is, but it doesn't hit the note like in the short term dominance does. That's since we've lost our attention capacity and now we're a nation of attention deficit disorder, anything that hits hard and sounds right is true.
Like that meme I saw earlier today.
Which one?
I don't know. It was just really offensive.
Yeah. Our attention span is really under a minute. That's a problem.
If you like our podcast, follow us on iTunes, Spotify, and SoundCloud. A special thank you to Neil Sharma. This episode was produced by 10 Directions, Tyson Lunn, and me, Tate Chamberlain. The sponsors include Humanities Montana, the City of Bozeman, the Montana Governor's Office of Economic Development, Montucky Cold Snacks, the Nova Cafe, 10 Directions, Headframe Spirits, Zocalo Coffee House, Whistle Pig Korean, Sola Cafe and Market, Shank Construction, the Pride Foundation, Loken Productions, and Blunderbuss. Do you have an issue that's riddled by gridlock in your community? Contact us at iaminterchange.org. That's iaminterchange.org.
I am interchange.